Okay, it looks like, I think we're all set. It's 5:05, so if we want to get started, Dave.
Yep, sounds good. I'll just close the chat box. Well, hi, welcome everybody. Megan, are you going to put the PowerPoint up now or after?
It should be up there now. I think I've gotten confirmation that people should be able to see it. Can you not see the PowerPoint?
It's not on my screen.
Yeah, I think others can, so I'm not sure if you're just on an iPad, if you can't see it.
Right, okay. Should be able to, though. I was on the Zoom meeting earlier. You should be able to share. So, but you do believe you're sharing it with the whole crowd. So we'll just take that at face value. Maybe we get one of your people to just send you a text.
Yeah, I've gotten a couple, but if participants want to send a message to the meeting host if they are unable to see it, let us know.
Yeah, use the chat. There's a chat function in Zoom. It's usually under the more or anyway, it's called chat. You'll find it. It's one of your controls. So I'm just going to go with it. Welcome everyone. I'm Dave Stolt, the General Manager at Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. Thanks for all attending virtually. This is a scoping meeting for the acquisition and boundary adjustment for the district related to Measure J. I'm going to, I guess, switch to the second slide after the title slide. I'm going to just give you a little bit overview of the meeting logistics. We're going to have a PowerPoint by Rincon Consultants, who is our CEQA consulting firm, and they're going to outline the EIR process, content of the EIR, the purpose of tonight. Now, keep in mind, EIRs are very methodical, and this is the beginning of a process. We issued the notice of preparation, I believe it was April 6th. Comments are open until May 6th. This scoping meeting, the purpose is to get input on the scope of the EIR from you concerned and active members of the community. But it's not for questions or elaboration on the project or, well, it can be some elaboration on the project, but not the whole feasibility work. It's not about cost. It's not about the wisdom of doing the acquisition. It's not about feasibility. It's purely about the environmental impacts of the acquisition and the boundary adjustment and where they fall relative to significant, less than significant, and so forth. And Megan and her team can explain that a little bit longer. During the video conference, you will be muted, and your comments and questions during the meeting should be provided in writing via the chat feature. Again, different devices have the control features in different locations. So depending on whether you're on a Mac, an iPad, a Surface, or just a standard old Windows PC, you'll see them possibly a little bit differently. But again, it's the chat feature that will tell the host that you have a question or a comment that you'd like to make. The meeting is being recorded. It should be posted tomorrow or the next day on the district website. And the PowerPoint slides will also be compiled in a PDF and made available through the district website. And with that, I want to make introductions, which is great since I have to do it by memory because I can't see the screen. But you've got the district team. While we do have a few board members who I see and participants have joined us, the formal members of the team are myself, Dave Stolt, your general manager, district general manager, and Fran Farina, who's representing DeLay and Laredo District Council. I guess, Megan, I'm going to have you introduce your team because I can't see the slide.
Yeah, that's fine. So from the Rincon team on the line, we have Jennifer Haddow, who's the principal in charge of the environmental review. Also Ashley Quackenbush, who's the assistant project manager, and myself, Megan Jones. I'm a principal with the firm, and I'm the project manager for this analysis. Is there any more introduction you want to do, Dave, or should I?
No, but I did find that I had screen sharing off, and now I can see the PowerPoint
Okay,
presentation. So, thank you very much. So I'm going to turn it over to you, Megan, and take it away.
Yeah, thank you, Dave. So as Dave mentioned, I'm Megan. I'll be leading the rest of this presentation. So I'll start with a brief outline. I think Dave covered all the logistics. I'll go over the chat function and how that's going to work towards the end as well, especially if people call in late. But we appreciate your patience and understanding as we work through this sort of unique virtual type meeting, given the shelter-in-place restrictions going on at the moment. As Dave mentioned, the meeting is being recorded, so that recording will be put on the district's website in the next couple of days. And we will also be posting the PowerPoint slides. So for those of you who may be on your iPhone or something, it's a very small screen. It might be a little hard to see some of the details. That will be online, so you can look at that later if you want to look at any of the details. So without further ado, I'll dive into the presentation. I'll start with a real quick introduction, the purpose of tonight's meeting, what it is we're doing here. I will talk about the proposed project in general as an overview so that everybody's on the same page about what it is we're analyzing in this document. I will then talk about the environmental review process in general, especially for those who are not as familiar with the process, so you understand the sort of the steps and the timeline that we'll be going through. And then I'll talk about the scoping of the document, so what it is we anticipate that we'll be analyzing in the document. Of course, we're looking for input on that as well, but we'll mention sort of some of the issues we already are aware of. And then I'll open up to public comment, and again, I'll go over some of the logistics of providing that comment there towards the end. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is first and foremost to inform the community and agencies about the proposed project and the environmental review. We're doing an environmental impact report, which you'll hear referred to. Looking at and also gathering ideas for alternatives. We are required to look at alternatives in this document, and so we want some input on what other alternatives to the project we could be looking at. And then last but definitely not least, the purpose of tonight's meeting is to inform the community about future opportunities for input. So I'll go over the steps in the process and also our anticipated timeline so that everybody's clear on when they'll get other opportunities to provide some input. So broadly speaking, the project that we're looking at is the potential acquisition of the Monterey water system, which is currently owned by California American Water, or CalAM. It does include a boundary adjustment for areas outside the district. I have a slide in a little bit that will show that in more detail. The purpose of this slide is really just to provide kind of the broad overview of the project location. So very, very broadly speaking, it's bounded to the north by CSUMB and former Fort Ord lands, to the east by unincorporated Monterey County, to the south by Big Sur in the Santa Lucia Mountains, and then of course the west by the Pacific Ocean, so fairly large area. The reason really for this project is that it's an implementation of Measure J. I think many of those on this meeting are probably well aware and familiar with what Measure J is, but for those who may be new to this, it was a ballot measure that was passed by the Monterey Peninsula voters in November 2018 that directed the district to conduct a feasibility study about public takeover of the CalAM water system. So in response to that, the district held a series of listening sessions in January 2019 to get input on an enactment of Rule 19.8, which is essentially the rule that requires the district to do this feasibility study. Then in August 2019, the district released a plan to pursue public ownership, and then followed up in October 2019 with a feasibility study called a preliminary valuation and cost service analysis report. So that was released in October last year. Sorry, bear with me as I adjust my slides here. And then that was followed up in November 2018 with a workshop on the feasibility study where the district received public input. So that was essentially the first phase of this whole process. We're now entering phase 2, and part of that phase 2 is the environmental review that we're starting here tonight. So the real underlying purpose for the district for this project is for the district to acquire, operate, and maintain the Monterey water system. So the objectives of the project are really all tied back to the purpose approved by the electorate in Measure J. That purpose taken straight from the measure is shown here. Again, for those of you looking on a small tablet or something, it may be very hard to see. And for those who may be just on the phone, I'll go ahead and read this, but the purpose is to ensure the long-term sustainability, adequacy, reliability, cost effectiveness, and quality of water service within the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District area, to lower the cost of service to ratepayers, to promote and practice sustainable water management measures, and to establish public ownership of water system assets by establishing regulations requiring the district to take affirmative action to the extent financially feasible to acquire the water system assets owned and operated by the California American Water Company that currently provides water service to the district and its ratepayers. So again, this is a little more detail on the project area, which you see the color coding, but just to be clear on what it is we're looking at. We're looking at what we're calling the Monterey water system from Cal-Am, which includes their main system, as well as Bishop, Hidden Hills, and Ryan Ranch. So those are the areas really kind of in the dashed lines here on the map for those who have a large enough screen to see that. It's about 55 square miles and has about 40,000 connections. I want to be clear that it does not include Cal-Am's central satellites, which are shown in this map on blue. So that includes Ralph Lane, which is up there to the north, and sort of these call-out boxes you see on the map. Ambler and Toro Park, which are here sort of in the middle, just to the east of the district boundaries. And then you have Chualar, of course, far to the east, south of Salinas, and Garrapatta. So those areas are not included in part of the project. The majority of what is included in the project is within the existing district boundary. However, there are two distinct areas that are outside of that boundary. That includes 33 residential connections at Yankee Point, which is to the south. Here, again, you see the call-out boxes. So that's sort of in the Carmel Highlands area. And then there's 10 residential connections in Hidden Hills, which is to the east of the district boundary along Varelis Grade Road. So those are the areas that would be annexed into the district as part of this project. So the project does include acquiring assets of Cal-Am within this area. So that includes a variety of things, including water systems and production wells, both current and planned, utility plants, vehicles and equipment, water rights, water supply contracts, records, books, and accounts, land, easements, and rental property. And to be clear, this does include the planned but not yet constructed facilities, such as the Monterey Water Supply Project desalination facility. So for whatever stage that's at the time the acquisition may happen, that would be part of the project. However, I do want to be clear that this EIR is not intended to analyze the environmental impacts of constructing the desal plant. As many of you are probably well aware, that's undergoing its own separate environmental review. So the project here is really the acquisition of that. It's at its heart a financial transaction, whereas the environmental impacts of constructing the desalination plant are being analyzed separately. So now I'll do a quick overview of the environmental review process. Just for a little bit of background. So the reason we're doing this is to comply with the California Environmental Quality Act, or CEQA as it's referred to. The purposes of CEQA are really to inform decision-making, as well as to disclose potentially significant environmental impacts of proposed action. So before CEQA was passed, decision makers didn't really have to consider environmental impacts of a proposed project. So now with CEQA, that is one of the key considerations. And so at its heart, it's all about disclosing those impacts so that the decision makers can make an informed decision. In CEQA, we do take it a step further by identifying ways to avoid or reduce environmental impacts through what we call mitigation measures. And we also look at alternatives, as I mentioned earlier. So again, we look at ways the project may be able to be implemented a little bit differently while reducing or avoiding environmental impacts. And then last, but definitely not least, a key purpose of the CEQA process is to foster public participation and interagency coordination through meetings like this one. This slide shows sort of the steps in the process. So the boxes on the left are each of the steps that we will follow, and the boxes on the right in green are those key opportunities for public to provide input. So you see on this diagram, we are here, we're at the very beginning of the process. The process really started April 6th when we issued a notice of preparation, or NOP. Many of you probably received that, and that's how you heard of this meeting. That's really what starts the process, and we enter this 30-day scoping period that we're in right now. So this is the first opportunity for the public to provide input during this whole scoping process, as well as at tonight's meeting. We then take all that input, we prepare the analysis, we submit an early draft to the district, we go back and forth on revisions. When it's finally at a clean, ready for public review, we prepare, that's what's called the draft EIR. When that's ready, we file a notice of completion, as well as posting a notice of availability of the draft EIR, which starts the next public review period, which is a 45-day public review of the EIR environmental analysis itself. So that's when the public has a chance to review the document, provide comments on the content of that analysis. Once that comment period closes, we take all of that comments, and under CEQA, we are required to respond to each and every comment in writing. So we do that in a responses to comments document. Often the responses result in minor modifications to the draft EIR text, and so we make those edits as well. Those edits, along with the responses, become what's called the final EIR. The final EIR, along with findings and statement of overriding considerations, if that's applicable, that's what goes to the decision makers for consideration. And then the third opportunity for public input is at that project hearing or multiple hearings if it goes to more than one. So again, as I've mentioned, and Dave mentioned as well, the purpose of tonight is to scope the EIR. We're just starting this process. We want input from agencies and the public on what environmental issues we should be looking at, if there's any specific alternatives we should consider. So we want to gather those comments regarding the scope of the EIR analysis. Again, we want to provide information on future opportunities for input. So I've outlined the process we're going to go through, and in a couple of slides, I'll show the timeline for when we expect to hit those different milestones. And then really tonight, we're also beginning the EIR process by getting this input. So the California Environmental Quality Act does require that we look at these specific 18 issue areas. It's a wide-ranging number of issue areas, from aesthetics to wildfire. This is a unique kind of project in that there's no development. It's ultimately a financial transaction, as I mentioned. There's not going to be any on-the-ground impacts like you would have with a typical development project. So some of these issue areas won't need to be discussed in detail. Something like aesthetics, if there's no new building, there's really no potential here for the project to disrupt a scenic view shed, for example. Also things like biological resources, cultural resources, there's not going to be any physical impacts to the ground. There's really not likely a potential to, impact sensitive species or disturb archaeological resources. So we are still required to look at these issues. We will look at the various thresholds in the CEQA guidelines, but many of these issues we anticipate will be discussed pretty briefly for those who are familiar, similar to an initial study level of detail. For the issue areas listed on this slide, we do anticipate looking in greater depth at these issue areas. And I'll just briefly outline sort of the thinking behind what we anticipate the impacts could be for this type of a project. The first key issue is that, as I mentioned, there's these satellite areas that Cal-Am has that would not be part of the project. So if the project happens, there's these satellite areas that Cal-Am would continue to service, whereas the district would service the rest of it. So there's a potential that having those two different organizations or agencies servicing those connections, there could be sort of a duplication of vehicle trips, for example. So specifically vehicle miles traveled. If there's an inefficiency there could be a net increase in vehicle miles traveled, or VMT as we call it in CEQA. So that we'll look at that, see if there is a potential for that, try to quantify, the extent. That has ramifications for air quality, greenhouse gas emissions, noise, and transportation. So those 4 issue areas will be primarily focused on that potential for increasing vehicle miles. The other key issue is water supply, and the thinking here is that, if the district does acquire these facilities and results in lower water rates for consumers, that lower rate may increase demand because it's cheaper, and so therefore people may demand more water. So we will look at the correlation between, the water rates and demand, and quantify how much demand could potentially increase if rates decrease to a certain amount. So that issue will be the focus of hydrology, water quality, and utilities sections within the EIR. Also listed here, of course, is alternatives. As I've mentioned, we are required to look at alternatives, so there will be a distinct chapter focused on that. And then I have others here with a question mark, because of course we're just starting, and the purpose of tonight is to scope the EIR. So we've done a preliminary scoping based on our professional experience with similar types of analyses. but we want to hear from public agencies, the public, various parties that may have input on other issue areas we should look at, other considerations within these issue areas. So we're open to that as part of this meeting. So real quick before we get to the end here, I just want to highlight the EIR timeline. So as Dave mentioned and I mentioned, we're in this scoping period right now that ends on May 6th. So May 6th is the actual deadline for submitting public comments. It's not just tonight. So you have some time to go back, think about it, draft an email or a letter and submit it. And the next slide will have the details on where to send that. And then I mentioned we go back and prepare the analysis. Based on our timeline, we anticipate releasing the public draft EIR in June or July 2020. And then once that comment period closes, we of course have to respond to all of the comments, prepare the final EIR. We anticipate that would be released and that hearings would happen by September or October 2020. So now this slide, for those who are able to clearly see it, it shows you all of the information you need to know about where to submit comments. We're going to open it up in a bit and I'll go over the logistics of that one more time. But again, we really want to focus on environmental issues and project alternatives. That's the purpose of tonight's meeting. It's really not intended to be a question and answer session, especially with this type of format. It's just not conducive to that anyway. So for security reasons, we have muted everybody and people are unable to share their screens. And so we're going to be using the chat function. The benefit of that really is that it also provides a written record. So we're able to save all of those chats. And so we will be saving that as part of the record. But for everybody who does comment, we do encourage you to also submit an email just to make sure that everything's accurately captured as you want it. And so the information here, you can send your written comments. The email address is comments@mpwmd.net. And the deadline for that is May 6th. So for the comments for tonight, for those who are newer to Zoom, there's a chat function, and depending on your device, it may be different on how to pull it up. So I see that at the top, there's a more button and you see chat. We're asking that people use a drop down of who you can send it to. Everybody should have two options, and that would be me or the meeting host. And we're asking that you send messages to the meeting host. And those will start to come to me. So I will be reading those into the record here. Depending on the number of comments we get, we may not get to all of them. We will try to. And also, if anybody has pre-prepared sort of a longer comment, I will read those. But for the longer ones, I'll set a timer to stick with the 3 minutes, which is sort of a standard, public comment. Just so we have time to get to everybody's. Again, we're not going to be answering questions. So we're looking for comments. And the other point I wanted to make is that if people are, let me see a raised hand here. Stephanie, can you unmute Dave? I don't have access. Oh, here we go.
Yeah, Megan, before we move too far past, it does appear that we've got at least 6 participants without video.
Okay, yeah, I was just going to mention that.
And so I just want to reiterate, you will be able to find how to submit your comments on the district's website. There's a button at the top of the homepage that will take you to the Measure J area. And while Megan read it fairly quickly, we will accept comments at the word comments at mpwmd.net. So that would be the way to kind of weigh in if you are not here and do not have the chat function. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. I was just going to mention that if there is anybody who's just on a phone and maybe doesn't have the screen share up, unfortunately, we're not able to take those comments verbally, but we encourage you to submit them by May 6th. So, okay, so with that, and while we wait for some comments to come in, yeah, and you can also, of course, write a letter and actually mail it to the address listed on the screen. If you don't have access to the screen, you can get on the district's website and see all of that information, but it's too many screens open. It's the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District. Attention David Stolt at 5 Harris Court. That's 5 Harris Court, Building G in Monterey, and the zip is 93940. Okay, and while we're waiting for the first sort of comments to come in, I do just want to thank everybody for taking the time to attend. I know there's, a lot going on in the world right now, so we really appreciate your time. and flexibility with us in doing this virtually. And also, I just want to thank you in advance for your patience as I work on reading these comments and working with this technology. It's definitely new for me as well. So make sure I'm not skipping anything.
And I guess I would add that don't feel bad if you don't have a comment. And Megan, don't feel bad if you don't get a comment. I've been to scoping meetings before with fewer people and more people, and we've gotten no real comments either. So, but we should give it some time and let people formulate their thoughts.
Yeah, and I do have the first one here. So this is from Luke Coletti, and he says, care and time should be taken to generate a single EIR instead of one that by design relies on multiple creeping feature supplemental EIRs, which have become so popular in obfuscate project analysis. That's from Luke Coletti. I don't know if this is from the same, I think this is from the same commenter. How can you evaluate the impact of lower water rates and consumption if you do not know how much the system will cost? So those are very good questions that we will be looking into as part of this analysis. So thank you for those comments. I haven't seen another one yet, but we'll give people some time to find the chat function, first of all, if you're new to it, and also type out your impact or your comments. Okay, here I have another one. This is from Gary H., and he asks, how would climate change impacts be addressed in the analysis? So thank you for that. As I mentioned, we're not doing a Q&A here, but just to reiterate, we are looking at greenhouse gas emissions, primarily from the potential vehicle miles traveled. So I'm guessing this comment may have to do with, impacts of climate change potentially. So that is something we'll look at as well. So thank you for that comment. I imagine there are more coming. We do have a good amount of people on. So.
Well, I guess while we're waiting, let me add that there is a process that we will be going through with the local agency formation commission within the county, LAFCO, and they also require a CEQA review. So part of the purpose of this is not just to determine if there's environmental impact, but also to bolster the applications in front of LAFCO.
And then I got a follow-up comment or question from Gary H. on should the analysis not assume lower rates? That is a good question. So we will look at that at sort of both scenarios. Okay, there's another one from Lauren Latendre, I'm guessing it is. It's all one word in here, so I apologize if I butchered that. How do you assign a cost or value to the desal plant since it is still in flux? That's a question for the district.
Yeah, and I guess while we're waiting, it's a good question. It's not really a CEQA related question, so may not get addressed in this, but it's certainly part of the rest of the team who's doing valuation work for a bona fide offer should the district board want to carry through.
And the next one is somewhat related, so maybe the same answer, but asking why Mr. Stolt is opposing the desal plant, but the district is including the desal plant in the acquisition for purposes of the EIR.
Also not a CEQA question.
Any others? I imagine we'll wait a little bit to make sure we're not missing any. But again, looking for if there's other issues. I mean, I sort of talked through the couple key issues that we're aware that we'll be looking at, but if there's anything else we should consider, any specific alternatives. Okay, and then here's another question. What applications are in front of LAFCO and when were they submitted? Again, we'll be looking at the LAFCO process and the annexation in the EIR. So this is the beginning of that process.
Right. Separate question, but no application's been entered yet.
There's another question. How will the Sand City desal plant be addressed as it can only operate within the CalAm system?
And we'll answer that in the CEQA document. Some good questions, by the way.
Mm-hmm. I'm glad to see that the chat function is working. Okay, this comes from Anna Kanga. Hi, Anna. There's a comment to suggest to analyze impacts to land use and planning. So that's a good comment as well, and we'll definitely be looking at that. And again, while we wait for others to possibly come in, for those of you who have, are submitting your comments this way, we still do encourage you to submit a letter and you have until May 6th for that. So either by email or snail mail if you prefer. Not seeing any others yet, but we'll hang tight for a minute. See, we do still have 47 participants, so there's some more people out there. If there's any comments. And there's another question on the desal plant, which is again sort of outside the scope of this meeting in the EIR, but asking if the district is in favor of the desal plant or not. A couple that just came in. Okay, so one comment from Gary H. saying the Hidden Hills system connections outside the district boundary, can they be specifically identified? And that is, if I may be able to go back and show, it's a little bit hard on this screen, but we are identifying. I don't know if the question is specific, I guess specific connections, if we'll be identifying that, but we're definitely looking at the area, so we'll have maps showing that in the EIR of what's included.
Yeah, and on that topic, I think it's important, we've identified, I think 33 in Yankee Point and 10 in Hidden Hills or whatever that number was, but that's, let's just call it approximate. We may be off by 1 or 2 connections, and we're confirming that right now. Basically by parcel and connection records.
And then I have another comment from, I got a bunch coming in. Regarding land use and planning, how much more office and maintenance space will MPWMD need if it acquires CalAm? So that is a good question as well. That's something we're outlining the details of that in the project description. But as I said, there's no construction as part of this project, so there's no new facilities being constructed. And then I see a comment from just Brian is all I see. How are state water board water orders affected by the takeover? Which is an interesting question. I'm not sure I have the answer to that, but that's something we'll look into as well. And another question, how I'm guessing it's Canada Woods, might be Canada Woods, water system will be addressed.
Right. I guess we might as well just answer that one right now. It was addressed in the August 2018 report. I'm sorry, 2019 report, as outside the scope of this acquisition, and therefore would be outside the scope of this CEQA work. The conclusion of the district at the time was none of the small system acquisitions made any sense if they were widely distributed throughout the region. And so it'd be the central CalAm system that would be the first and logical starting point to make any of the others make any sense, but not within the scope of this CEQA analysis.
Okay, and there's a question from George saying, what authority does RINCON have in an EIR to get information from CalAM? It's not entirely related to the analysis. We primarily base it on public information. And then what is the purpose of the meeting if you are not answering questions? That is a good question. I understand that frustration. But as I mentioned, the purpose of the meeting is to get input from the public and agencies on the scope of the EIR. And because the focus is on the environmental analysis and not, other processes the district has gone through to this point, and we're just starting, we don't have the answers yet, is the answer to that. So we're looking for the input. So the draft EIR is where you'll see the content on that. Here's another question. If you do not acquire the CalAM systems not included in the revised boundaries, there would be a potential cost ramification on those ratepayers. Is that explored in the EIR?
Well, again, the answer is cost is not a CEQA element, so it would be handled elsewhere.
And then there's a question of how the seaside water system will be addressed as it has its own water supplies. So yeah, we will be looking at the various water supply sources, particularly in the water supply analysis that we do for utilities and hydrology. We'll be looking at the various sources.
Yeah, I think that one is similar to the ranch, the Kenyatta Woods water system answer, which is any of the other smaller water distribution systems throughout the system would be analyzed separately and later.
I don't see any others coming in at the moment, but we'll wait just a few minutes, see if anybody else has some questions or comments. So far, I think good comments and definitely good questions, things to explore in the analysis. So thank you for your input thus far. We'll wait another minute or so. And of course, if even if you have submitted comments, we've encouraged everybody to write a letter or email anyway. But if you, after this meeting, think of something else, or you go and review other background materials or whatever, I mean, you can definitely submit more than one comment. Another question: the desal plant is not within the district's certified area, is it? With a question mark. I think that's a question of the district boundaries and the desal plant once again.
Yeah, we might as well answer that one straight up, and also dialing back several questions to the frustration about answering questions. Everybody comes into these types of scoping meetings with different levels of knowledge, and so some of our attendees are very knowledgeable. For some, this may be the first time that you're actually seeing what this is about, which is why there's a bit of a description of the project at the front end. And some of these, it's folks who aren't ready to comment, but wanted to see what it's all about, and then we'll come up with specific comments before the May 6th deadline. So, different opportunities. Now to answer that actual question about the desal plant, no, it is not within the district's boundaries, but our belief under the body of eminent domain law, if it's an asset specifically to serve the customers within our jurisdiction, then it's part of the assets that are to be acquired.
Okay, we had another question has come in of what impact will there be to our sewer system if CalAM is acquired? I guess my description probably wasn't direct on this, but it is just a water supply facilities included in this.
And that does go to Megan's earlier description of the central satellites. Although she dwelt on water, any of the CalAM wastewater facilities that are in the Central Coast region would be similar to the central satellite water facilities. They would be subject to some sort of separate disposition. It's not part of this acquisition.
And we got another one, just I guess to full disclosure, we got a good job on this Zoom conference, Megan and Dave. So we appreciate that input. Any other comments here? I want to make sure to give people time so we don't cut anyone off. It's been a few of the same commenters. I do see we saw 45 participants. So again, you're not required to provide input, so that's fine if you don't have any. But if you think it's something later, we definitely want to hear that input. So another one. Will the CEQA analysis address the proposed water supply project components?
Megan, I didn't even hear that.
Can you hear me? Yeah, it's, will the CEQA analysis address the proposed water supply project components?
Yeah, I think you've answered that, but it will address it.
Yeah, we're not addressing the construction of the facilities because that's part of a separate project and separate analysis, but we're addressing the potential acquisition of those components. And then, are you contending that the district can operate the system better than Cal-AM? That's outside the scope of the environmental review. So we're just looking at the potential impacts of the potential acquisition. So. I'll do a last call for comments. And to everybody who attended, again, we really appreciate you taking the time. And, especially with everything going on, and to take the time to attend one of these meetings and provide input, or just to get better informed, we really appreciate it. And I guess with that, I got to thank you, which is great. One more message, let's see. Okay, it took me a second to understand, but yeah, operation of the system is critical to the environmental impact, isn't it? And that is true. There are operational impacts, so those are what we'll primarily be looking at in this document. A couple more minutes here.
Well, it sounds like we're wrapping up unless something pops in the next 30 to 45 seconds. But I want to thank Rincon for organizing the meeting, having a fairly seamless video conference, much appreciated. At one point, we were up to 48 attendees. So I want to thank the members of the public who felt it was worth time at 5 o'clock on a Tuesday evening to either weigh in with an opinion or get more informed. So we very much appreciate your participation.
Yes, and seeing no other comments, I think we will end the meeting. And yeah, please, as we said, you have till May 6th to submit other comments, either, hard copy letter, email, on the scope and content of the EIR. So we look forward to receiving those and preparing the EIR. So no other chats, I think we'll call it. Again, thank you, everyone. Have a good evening.
Very good. Thank you all.